as well. I applaud President Trump's recent decisive action to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern for engaging in and tolerating severe violations of religious freedom. One of our witnesses today, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe from the Diocese of Makurdi, testified before our subcommittee last March. He said, in part, militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize, they kill and boast about it, they kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity from elected officials. None of them have been arrested and brought to justice, close quote. Today, by Zoom, Bishop Anagbe will say, in part, on the 13th of March, 2025, when I last appeared before this committee, I warned that the situation was dire and demanded urgent attention. Tragically, the past half year has proven those warnings understated. The continued attacks on vulnerable Christians, villages by the Fulani ethnic militia and their counterparts, both in the middle belt of Nigeria and elsewhere in the country. In my own diocese of Makurdi, you are all familiar with the massacres of Saturday, the 13th of June in Yalawada, where 278 persons, men, women, and children were killed in a manner too gory to describe here by people shouting Allah Akbar while slaughtering their victims. It took the prayer of the Holy Father, Pope Leo, on Sunday, the 14th of June, for the government of Nigeria to even acknowledge this evil. Even so, the federal government still seeks to downplay the numbers and has yet to properly care for the survivors, even as I speak, as he will be speaking momentarily by way of Zoom. Abductions of the clergy and laity remain rampant. Priests and pastors are prime targets for elimination. In 2015, one of our colleagues, a member of this subcommittee and also this full committee, I should say, and of Foreign Affairs, and a former House colleague and Green Beret officer, and now U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, he was deployed in 2015 to Nigeria as part of a Nigerian he was part of the Special Forces to provide training and security assistance to the Nigerian Navy SEALs in their fight against Boko Haram. During this time there, he said yesterday, a couple of days ago, more than 300 girls were reported missing because of Boko Haram's extremist violence. Working alongside his team, Ambassador Waltz supported Nigerian SEAL operations that ultimately helped rescue many of these girls from the oppressive conditions imposed by Sharia law. This past Tuesday, Ambassador Waltz also said at a special seminar on Nigeria that the situation in Nigeria now has only grown more dire. He went on to say, churches burn, mothers bury their children for the crime of singing Amazing Grace, pastors are beheaded for preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and entire villages awaken to gunfire simply by calling Jesus their Lord. This is not random violence. It is deliberate persecution as northern militant groups enforce Sharia law and unleash targeted attacks on Christian communities. He also pointed out, and it was this week, that 25 girls went missing, many of whom who will now vanish and have vanished into the dark underbelly of extremism and sex slavery. Make no mistake, these ongoing attacks are based on religion, and diverting attention from it denies what we have seen with our own eyes. Yeah, there may be other factors, but religion is driving this. Kill the infidel. We see it in other places, and we're seeing it now, sadly, in Nigeria, and it's been going on for many, many years. 13 years ago, in this room, 2012, I chaired a hearing focusing on the slaughter of Christians by Boko Haram, and the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Johnny Carson, testified at that hearing and said, and I quote in part, that the phenomena of Boko Haram is one of discrediting the central government in power for its failure to deliver services to the people. I asked him at the time, are you kidding? I responded by asking why Boko Haram abducts and rapes Christian girls and uses force and coercion, even death, to convert Christians to Islam. On a trip to an IDP camp in Jos, I met many survivors. One man who we had testify here, named Adama, who they took him out of his house. His wife was screaming, please don't hurt my husband. They put a AK-47 to his cheek and said, "You renounce your faith or we'll kill you." He said, "Well, I'm ready to meet my Lord." They asked him again. He repeated that, and they shot him. They blew his face very, very horribly. He survived. And when I met him, I invited him to come and testify. He did. And he said, "You've got to realize who Boko Haram is and stop this idea," this is my words, but his sentiment, of denial, of saying, it's nothing to see here. So I asked Johnny Carson further, why won't they designate Boko Haram, at least, if not a CPC country, as a foreign terrorist organization? And he said they don't believe it. They're not a foreign terrorist organization. I worked on that for 3 years, additional hearings. On the day I was marking up my bill, and it was called the Boko Haram Terrorist Designation Act of 2013, to put Congress on record demanding an FTO designation, that day the administration declared Boko Haram a foreign terrorist organization. I was very happy with it. But we could have done that 3 years earlier, maybe had found out what their sources of weapons and funding and everything else might have been, thereby, again, mitigating some of the harm. For too long, the world has looked away, a culture of denial, as radical Fulani militants, Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa have waged a relentless campaign of terror, murder, and displacement across Nigeria, including the states of Plateau, Benue, and Kaduna. According to Open Doors, and I just want to say something about Open Doors, I've worked with Open Doors for 40 years. I knew the founder, Brother Andrew, an absolutely honest and committed man, and that organization to this day continues to speak truth to power all over the world, including in Nigeria. Well, they have said, Open Doors, more Christians are slaughtered in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. I co-chair the China Commission. I just left a hearing that we're holding over on the Senate side on religious persecution there, against everyone, against the Falun Gong, against the Christians, against the Buddhists in Xinjiang, not the Buddhists, the Buddhists in Tibet, and the Muslims in Xinjiang. And while they kill many, they incarcerate and harass more than they slaughter. These groups in Nigeria are doing just that, slaughtering. Another group has said over 52,000 Christians in Nigeria have reportedly been targeted and killed by Islamist extremists, while approximately 34,000 moderate Muslims have been murdered as well since 2009. And, that is less focused upon. I raise it every time, and I hope we all will. They're killing those who don't conform to the radical Islamist view, and so they get killed too. I met with many imams on trips to Nigeria as well as here. And they say, if we speak out, we'll be firebombed too. During a visit, 19,000 churches have also been attacked. More than 7,000 have been murdered in this year alone. During my visit to Jos in 2013, I visited many churches that have been firebombed in Jos. And I listened to the survivors and was moved almost to tears, and to tears with some, when they talked about the numbing loss and pain of losing loved ones. And the churches were decimated, each and every one of them, either by cars coming in and plowing everybody and destroying the physical, or by bombs, and of course always the ever-present AK-47. They pleaded with their own government and the world to end the cruelty and violence. And I've been raising it, as have many others ever since. About 5 million Christians have been displaced and forced into internally displaced persons camps within Nigeria and refugee camps at regional and sub-regional borders, according to an Inter-Society report. Open Doors reports, and again, I hope we can finally get beyond just saying nothing's to see here. While Christians used to be vulnerable only to Muslim-majority northern states, this violence continues to spread into the Middle Belt and even further south. The attacks are shockingly brutal. Many believers are killed, particularly men, while women are often kidnapped and targeted for what? Sexual violence, rape, and other abuse. More believers are killed for their faith in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. These militants also destroy homes, churches, and livelihoods. And many people don't go to school anymore. One estimate is 10,000 schools have been closed due to this violence. The Nigerian government has a fundamental constitutional obligation to protect its own citizens. Yet the brutal reality is that the perpetrators of these crimes operate with impunity. The lack of accountability sends a chilling message that the lives of Christian farmers and their families are expendable. This failure has rightfully been called out by the President of the United States, President Trump, and Secretary of State Rubio. The United States must not stand by idly. I've introduced resolutions, and others have been introduced as well. Res 82. I had done that previously on 82, asking that the Biden administration, we had an interesting conversation and debate on that resolution. It did pass 26 to 21. And part of the argument that was made by Mr. Meeks and my very distinguished colleague to my left is that it's the President and the Secretary of State that needs to make that call, not us. I think we can encourage something. That's what it did. But nevertheless, now they've made the call. And I think we need to, double down and try to stop this. Res 860, which I've introduced, also calls on conditioning U.S. foreign assistance, and it must be tied to progress from the Nigerian government in preventing persecution, prosecuting perpetrators, and protecting all communities. Second, it would provide direct humanitarian assistance, especially the faith-based groups working on the ground in the Middle Belt. What we're hearing is that it's not getting through. People are hungry, so we need to make sure that they're helped. And third, we must impose targeted sanctions pursuant to the Global Magnitsky Act, using visa bans and access freezes against individuals and entities responsible for these gross human rights abuses. President Trump, as I conclude, said, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. The United States cannot stand by while atrocities are happening in Nigeria. I yield to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses who are going to be testifying today on conflict and religious persecution in Nigeria. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation we'll have with Ambassador Pratt and Deputy Assistant Secretary McGee, as this committee is long overdue to hold a hearing with Trump administration officials. The African continent continues to be both increasingly important and increasingly overlooked. The continent is the youngest in the world, and in Nigeria alone, 70% of the population is under 35, and 40% is under 15. So it represents the generations who will continue to lead and solve the world's problems. Nigeria has a unique position as a bellwether, as Africa's largest economy, most populous nation, and a significant actor in the region and on the world stage. And meanwhile, Nigeria is facing its own challenges, like rising insecurity, shrinking freedom of expression, and a struggling economy. So let's talk about the very real conflict and violence happening in Nigeria. Nigeria is facing multiple different security challenges in various parts of the country, including violent extremist groups in the northeast, criminal banditry in the northwest, and across the country, farmer-herder conflict in the Middle Belt, and other intercommunal violence in central and northern regions. Several factors are driving these conflicts. Yes, ethnicity and religion play a role in some cases, but other dynamics like poor governance, resource competition, climate change, and population pressures are important drivers that need to be addressed. I appreciate the chairman's passion on this and his long work on Nigeria. I think it's a distortion to say that what we're trying to say is that there's nothing to see here. In fact, there is something to see here. There is very real conflict and violence that we need to address. I've been working on addressing conflict in Nigeria since 2013, 2014, when I was part of the counter Boko Haram strategy at the State Department. The violence impacting both Christian and Muslim communities is real, and the Nigerian government can and should do more to address it. I was horrified to learn of the killing of 2 people and the kidnapping of the pastor and a worshiper at a church in Kwara State. And this came only a few days after, as the chairman mentioned, criminal bandits kidnapped 25 girls in Kebbi State. But it is counterproductive to adopt oversimplistic narratives about the multiple complex overlapping security challenges and violence across the country. The victims in the Kebbi State kidnapping were all Muslim girls. So violence affects everyone, and false narratives perpetuate harmful stereotypes and motivate tensions and violence based on religious identity. Distorting what's happening into a solely religious narrative erases the real drivers of violence and makes it harder to implement effective solutions. And it can fuel violence against the very groups the Trump administration claims it wants to protect. That's why I'm alarmed by President Trump's rhetoric about this violence and threats to go into Nigeria, guns a-blazing, and to wipe out terrorists. We are already receiving reports of increased tensions between Christian and Muslim populations following this rhetoric. President Trump's threat is reckless, and any unilateral military action in Nigeria would be illegal. Congress has not authorized force in Nigeria to protect Christians, and any action without Nigeria's consent violates international law. We also know that a military-first response won't actually address the violence and will do very little to protect Christian communities. As I said, I worked on Nigeria policy since I was at the State Department in 2014, so I know firsthand these security challenges are multifaceted, and they require a holistic approach. A military-led approach risks more civilian casualties and impunity, which will only fuel violent extremism more. So we need to use more tools from our foreign policy toolbox if we're serious about helping Nigeria protect its citizens. That means we need to leverage diplomacy and engage with Nigeria on how we can help support their response while pushing for important reforms within Nigeria's institutions. We also need to utilize foreign assistance to fund programs to help prevent violence and address conflict drivers. But the Trump administration so far has hobbled these tools. On the diplomatic front, while I'm glad to see Ambassador Pratt will be here representing the African Affairs Bureau, we still have yet to see even a nomination for an Assistant Secretary for Africa. And we don't have a Senior Director for Africa at the NSC either. There are several emergent conflicts in Africa, including in Nigeria, but also in Sudan, DRC, and across the Sahel and in Ethiopia that demand high-level, consistent, and substantive engagement. Occasional attention from the president, while most of the time welcome, won't be enough to see lasting results on all of these different crises. And on the development front, President Trump's dismantling of USAID and cuts of hundreds of millions of dollars worth foreign assistance in Nigeria is worsening the violence. For years, the United States has supported Nigerian institutions, civil society, faith-based leaders, and researchers to address the conflict, violence, and religious freedom challenges. These programs proactively prevented and directly addressed the violence this administration is now concerned about. For example, a recent article in DevEx highlighted a program that Secretary Rubio terminated, which has left a void in communities that suffer violence. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a DevEx article titled "The Cuts That Bleed: What Happens When Peace Programs Go Dark." Thank you. This article focuses on a former program implemented by Search for Common Ground, a peace-building organization that provided critical early warning in communities in Yelwata, a region in Nigeria's Middle Belt, where conflict and violence have erupted between Muslim herders and Christian farmers. This early warning program was responsible for fewer violent incidences before Secretary Rubio terminated it. In June, this same community was left in a lurch without this extra early warning support when an attack happened in Makurdi. Nearly 200 people were killed, hundreds burned alive in their homes and market stalls torched, and almost 4,000 people fled. And this is just one example where the United States has abandoned communities with no explanation. I have another article, this time from the LA Times by former USAID Foreign Service Officer Daniel Morris, that details another program that was helping prevent violence, but was discontinued. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an LA Times article titled "Trump Cuts Nigeria's Aid Back in March, Now He Wonders Why It's So Violent." Thank you. This article discusses a program called the Community Initiatives to Promote Peace that operated in northern Nigeria. It trained community elders, including religious and tribal leaders, in conflict resolution, and the results were impressive. After giving one group training and making another one a control group for 6 months, each group was asked if their communities experienced violence. Here's what the article says. Only 10% of people in communities that received negotiation training and dialogue meetings said yes, compared to 41% of people in communities that hadn't. The Nigerians in the treatment group reported feeling more secure, more likely to walk around their communities, and less likely to avoid certain areas than those in the control group. We don't always see these kinds of results. So the fact that we were and the administration eliminated this program is incredibly short-sighted and counterproductive given their apparent interest in this issue. So if we want the United States to help prevent and address conflict in Nigeria, we can't pull back and eliminate our tools like President Trump has done. I urge the administration to reverse these decisions, nominate people at senior levels to work on Africa issues, and commit to working on this seriously, not just through a few Truth Social posts. So I look forward to hearing the testimony of Ambassador Pratt and Deputy Assistant Secretary McGee on what the State Department is planning to do to address the violence in Nigeria and how it plans to partner with Nigeria on doing so. And lastly, while I'm glad we have our witnesses here to discuss Nigeria today, I would be remiss to not also raise Sudan, since this is our first time with the State Department witnesses in front of this subcommittee this Congress, and we still have not had a budget hearing. The situation in Sudan is horrific. And while I'm glad to see this war finally getting high-level attention from President Trump, I look forward to hearing from Ambassador Pratt about what the department's plan is to both make a deal that brings a lasting end to the war in Sudan and invest in a real peace process for the Sudanese people. Thank you. I yield back.
We will now receive a testimony from Bishop Anagbe. He is leaving for a major speech in Germany, and will miss his flight if we wait until thankfully our two very distinguished witnesses from state have agreed, because normally the protocol is they go first, and I do thank them for that. But I'd like to welcome Bishop Anagbe back. He gave very compelling testimony back in March, and we all appreciated that very much. But he is in Benue State. He was ordained a Catholic priest in August of 1994, and Pope Francis elevated him to bishop in 2014. So, Bishop Anagbe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Congressmember Chris Smith. The Most Reverend Wilfred Anagbe, Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Makurdi, Benue, Nigeria. Before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, African Subcommittee, November 20, 2025. President Trump's redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, CPC, a serious, well-founded wake-up call. I am here this evening talking that because I have the privilege of witnessing, the privilege of experiencing. I'm not talking as a privilege of opinion. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me back to testify on the escalating crisis of Christian persecution and genocide in Nigeria. 6 months ago, precisely on 13th March 2025, when I last appeared before this committee, I warned that the situation was there and demanded urgent attention. Tragically, the past half year has proven those warnings understated the continued attack on vulnerable Christian villages by the Fulani ethnic militia and their counterparts, both in the Middle Belt of Nigeria and elsewhere in the country. Since my testimony in March 2025, credible reports from organizations monitoring religious freedom, including Open Doors and our own Justice, Development and Peace Commission in Makurdi Diocese, have documented continuing attacks on Christian villages, especially in the Middle Belt states of Benue and Plateau, perpetrated by the Fulani militia. Thousands more have been displaced, some adopted or subjected, with entire villages razed and churches destroyed. My own village of Aondana in Gwe West local government was attacked and several of my relatives killed on May 22nd, 2025. An entire convent of Reverend Sisters of the Clarisha Missionary was displaced, along with the local Catholic parish. Within the days following that attack, nearby villages like Naka also witnessed attacks. In fact, on the 24th May 2025, one of my priests, Father Solomon Atongu, was shot and left to die in the pool of his blood, while those traveling with him were adopted. Though he survived the attack, he is unable to walk freely because he has a broken bone. A few weeks before, on Palm Sunday, April 13, 2025, with the attack occurring late that night into the early hours of April 14th, Fulani militants launched a coordinated assault on Christian communities in Plateau State, Nigeria, primarily targeting the village of Zike in the Basa local government area near Jos. This incident was part of a broader wave of violence in the region during Holy Week, targeting Christians as they prepare to celebrate one of the most holy, important feasts in our church. In my own diocese of Makurdi, You are all familiar with the massacres of Saturday, 13th June in Yellowater, where 278 persons, men, women, and children were killed in a manner too gory to describe here by people shouting Allah Akbar, while slaughtering their victims. It took the prayers of the Holy Father Pope Leo XIV on Sunday, June 14th, for the government in Nigeria to even acknowledge this evil. Even so, the federal government still seeks to downplay the numbers and has yet to properly care for the survivors, even as I speak. Adoptions of clergy and laity remain rampant. Priests and pastors are prime targets for elimination. On 17th November 2025, another priest from Kaduna Archdiocese was kidnapped while his brother was shot dead and others taken into captivity. On the same day, a school was attacked in Kebbi State with many kidnapped, and the vice principal of the school was killed. Reports are also rife of the capture of a brigadier general of the Nigerian army with some army officers and soldiers by the Islamists. This is the daily experience of many Christians in Nigeria. Violence is spreading southward, displacing millions and destroying farmland, creating a humanitarian crisis compounded by food insecurity. Attacks by Fulani militants, Boko Haram, Islamic State of West African province, ISWAP, have intensified not only in the Middle Belt and northern states, but spreading southward and targeting Christian communities with impunity. We hoped the CPC designation by President Trump at the end of October might stabilize the situation, but instead it is deteriorating into one of the most lethal periods for Nigerian Christians in recent memory. Like it is now commonly acknowledged, Nigeria remains the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. More believers are killed there annually than in the rest of the world combined. Yet, perpetrators face little accountability, and the Nigerian government's response since the CPC designation is to unleash vain-glory speakers and willing tools to spin the narrative and make false equivalencies about Muslim deaths. But I would like to ask the question here, who is killing the Muslims up north? Is there any Christian militia displacing millions and occupying lands in Nigeria? The government of Nigeria's silence and refusal to engage in the face of continued killings and displacements has deepened feelings of abandonment among the people. The national leadership appears disengaged, treating the Christian genocide report as a non-issue instead of considering it a national emergency. This lack of political will undermines trust in government institutions and fuels perceptions of complicity or indifference. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, allow me to briefly mention another point so close to my heart, the humanitarian and social impact of this genocide. In the Middle Belt alone, millions of internally displaced persons remain in camps, unable to return to their ancestral lands. This threatens cultural continuity, religious and economic survival. The psychological trauma of survivors of these attacks is immense, with little access to counseling or rehabilitation. Widows, orphans, and survivors face ongoing threats. Girls and women endure sexual violence as a weapon. So many others resort to unsafe coping mechanisms for daily sustenance, destroying families, guarantees that no more Christian will be born from so many traumatized women. This is one of the elements of genocide, securing the disappearance of a group by longer-term measures other than murder. Without quick intervention, Christianity risks elimination in parts of northern and middle belt Nigeria within a very short time. Let me put it on record here that on behalf of millions of Christians in Nigeria and in the diaspora, we want to thank President Donald J. Trump for his bold leadership in designating Nigeria as a CPC. I commend you, Mr. Chris Smith, and this subcommittee's ongoing leadership and the recent U.S. designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. It is a vital step, but must be backed by serious action. One, using the Magnitsky Act for targeted sanctions on Nigerian government officials and others tolerating or condoning Islamic violence in the country. Tie security and other development or humanitarian aid to measurable protection improvements. Expand humanitarian support for IDPs. The IDPs must return to their ancestral homes and lands with security guarantees by the Nigerian government. They must also be supported to rebuild their economic livelihoods and enjoy basic services such as education and sanitation. Support bills like the Nigerian Religious Freedom Accountability Act to hold perpetrators accountable. This point cannot be overemphasized because it is impunity that fuels the violence we suffer. Irrespective of who are being killed, the prime question is, are there killings in Nigeria? And the government should stop it. International advocacy, work with allies to press Nigeria at the UN and ensure discriminatory laws and blasphemy laws are eradicated or expunged from the Constitution. Closing call to action. The CPC designation has brought immense joy, hope, and spiritual resilience